Anyway, welcome to the LSE for those of you who are not normally here. We're out of term time now, so many of you may be from outside, but whether or not you're welcome. We're here this evening for a public lecture by the Right Honourable David Lammy MP, who is the Labour Member of Parliament for Tottenham. He was born in Tottenham and won a scholarship as a chorister to attend a state choral school before coming back to London after that to study law at university. He was admitted to the Bar of England and Wales in 1994 and was briefly a member of the newly created London Assembly in 2000. Following the death of Tottenham's long-standing and well-known MP Bernie Grant, David, that is, was elected as the MP for Tottenham at the age of 27. Must have been one of the youngest. Were you the youngest MP at the time? I think so. Yeah, sounds like it. In June 2000. And during the last Labour government, from 1997 to, which lasted from 1997 to 2010, he was between 2001 and 2010 a minister and was made a Privy Councillor in 2008. He is now, many of you will be aware of this from the media, an active MP and commentator on London affairs, and declared in an interview with the Evening Standard last year that he will be a candidate for the Labour nomination to stand in the 2016, and I've put brackets here, 2015. You never know what's going to happen, do you? And the forthcoming, following next London mayoral race. And, you know, in fairness to David, he got his, made clear what he was going to do early. Others have come, you know, not quite so sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, David Lammy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was so nice. It was more like an obituary than a sort of introduction, a tour of my life. I have been described by one newspaper as the dark horse of the race for London Mayor. So I hope tonight I get to sort of give a broad sense of where I'm coming from as we head into a general election. And can I just say that I am an alumni of SOAS. I came to some fantastic parties at LSE 20-odd years ago. They were notorious. So it is always good to be back here in this sort of growing empire in this bit of London. Thank you very much to Tony for inviting me to do this. Very grateful. And of course, to be at this fantastic institution. Look, I want to start today not by talking about London, but I want to start by talking about a small village a long way away from here. It's where the story of my own relationship with London begins, and it's one of the very small agricultural villages that lines the banks of the Demerara River in Guyana in South America. It was here just after the Second World War was breaking out that my mother was born. She and her 6 siblings, like many in her generation in that part of the world, living in a former colony of Britain, but very much in a rural environment, was destined really for a work on one of the local farms. But my mother Rose had other ideas. She had heard stories of a faraway city, a city where she could fulfill her potential and make something of herself that was more than just subsistence farming. That city then was this city. And it was with this in mind that on an overcast, wintry afternoon in 1970, she stepped off a plane at Gatwick to begin a new life. She was greeted, like so many others, with a biting wind and a strip search. In fact, the city was not as welcoming as she originally thought. Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech had just rocked British politics, and many landlords still declared no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. That was in this country, and of course, it was only 2 years after the murder of Martin Luther King in the United States of America. But she brought with her more than just a formidable recipe for chicken curry. She brought a tireless work ethic and a deep dedication. Like many immigrants to this city at that time, my mother was able to seize on the opportunities that then existed in London. Like countless others, she relied on the Labour Party to stand up for her when her child benefit was frozen. She relied on public libraries to nourish the minds of her children. She watched proudly as the first generation in our family was given the opportunity to go to university, and later in life, as she fought a battle against ovarian cancer, she was cared for wonderfully by the NHS, which treated her with dignity and compassion. But it was not just the state that stepped in to help her, it was also the community that existed around her. A friendly trade union official helped her to find a course of learning that made it possible for her to find work that could provide for our family. Friends and neighbours looked after her children while she juggled life as a single mother. And later on, Macmillan nurses looked after her when she became terminally ill. It was these relationships, underlying relationships, that made the difference to her life. And it's not an exaggeration to say that London gave both my mother and me all that we have. For both of us, a new world of opportunities opened up from the experience of living, working, and learning in this great city. For her, it meant the chance to go to night school and learn a Pitman shorthand secretarial course so she could get into Haringey Council, move on from working at Camden Town Tube Station for London Underground, and end up in a managerial position. And for me, the opportunities first took the form of an Inner London Education Authority choral scholarship that Tony referred to at a state school, I always underline state school, in Peterborough. The Inner London Education Authority would not give you a scholarship to a public school in those days. And later, it of course meant the opportunity for me to study law at SOAS, just up the road from here, and then at Harvard Law School. It was in London that I got the opportunity to become a barrister, to get my foot on the housing ladder at the age of 27, which sounds frankly unbelievable now. Absolutely unbelievable. And I only did it because I thought, I've become an MP, I probably ought to buy a house. And later, obviously, to represent my home in Parliament. The ideal of London as a city of opportunity became a reality for both my mother and myself, just as it had for millions before us. From the Roman traders who made their fortunes in the city squares, to the merchants of the Middle Ages who came to London as a hub of business, to the post-war Windrush generation that sought a better life. The London I grew up with and the one I grew to love has at its core the idea of opportunity, endless possibility, advancement and success. It is part of what this city is, a place of settlement for newcomers and migrants, a place of exchange for strangers to trade with each other, a centre of learning, culture and experiment where great ideas are born. a place to come together against common adversity, and at its best, a global hub of opportunity for all who live here. That was the London that I knew, but sadly, it is not the London I see now. It is hard to argue that London is still a city of opportunity for all. The city that my 3 children are growing up in today is very different to the one I was born into. Today, 1 in 4 young people in London is unemployed, and the average age of a first-time buyer will in this generation rise to 52. Nearly a third of Londoners live below the poverty line. 650,000 are trapped in low-paid work, and the gap between the rich and the poor widens every day. I want to make the argument tonight that these changes have their roots in 2 interlinked revolutions. The first is the social revolution of the 1960s, driven by the post-war growth of personal choices, education and social mobility, and fueled by an idea of liberalism that located meaning, power, and responsibility in the hands of the individual. The second is a market revolution that found fertile ground in the economic stagnation and social conflict of the 1970s, driven by the idea of personal freedom, the dogma that rational market choice would create wealth by giving people incentives to work hard and advance through private enterprise. A simple, powerful idea, the freedom of the individual to shape and transform their own lives, produced these 2 great waves of change that have reshaped our society and our economy over the last generation. They transformed our world and altered our society. And inevitably, they changed our city too. For those with the right background, or a bit of luck, London remains a city of great opportunities. But for those without these advantages, the 2 revolutions had a far more damaging effect. Social cohesion was replaced by a dog-eat-dog individualism, and competition overwhelmed community. The community relationships that had supported my mother so well were eroded as neighbours were made to become rivals, competing for jobs, homes and services. Many of my childhood friends found themselves stuck in damp, dark homes on estates across London. And with little prospect of decent work, some turned to crime to make a living. A new language of rights took hold, but without recognition of the traditional responsibilities to each other, our family, our community that had previously accompanied them. Inequality soared, and coupled with the advances of globalisation, a new group of Londoners was formed, locked out of the global economy and abandoned by a society in the grip of rampant individualism. The widespread opportunities that had led my mother and millions like her to move to London, both within the country and the British Isles, but also outside the country, had started to dry up. The gap between rich and poor began to grow. The seeds of a fragmented London were sown. And it is that London that we see so many manifestations of today. Somewhere in the process of the 2 liberal revolutions and rapid globalizations, millions have been left behind, deprived of the great benefits that these changes have given others, even while they live and work right next to them. London's boroughs now house 74 billionaires and 400,000 millionaires, whilst in those same communities, 2.4 million people live in poverty. Whatever populists like Nigel Farage tell us, the answer is not to return to the past or to deny the realities of a globalised world, and nor should we. London has played a part in the many different phases of globalisation. It was London that sent British ships off to faraway lands to begin the process of colonising and thus connecting the world, we should remind Mr. Farage. From the rise of the Roman conquest to the Crusades, from the Blitz and the worldwide struggle against fascism, to the Big Bang of the 1980s and financial deregulation, which he was such a big part of, global events have left their mark on this city's fabric. But that is not to say we are powerless to shape them. Instead, we must find new ways of harnessing the power of globalisation and using it to benefit all Londoners rather than just some. Today, London is wealthier than it has ever been in its history. This year, its population of 8.6 million has overtaken that of 1939. But it's also held back by a set of barriers, and if they're not addressed, they will continue to act as a brake on its future success. From a broken housing market to a lack of skilled labour, from a my rights attitude in which people hesitate to think of others to a consumerist culture driven by materialistic values, from community breakdown and social mistrust to the pressure on the family in a low-wage economy. The question then is how we tackle the worst excesses of the revolutions I've described. It's easy, too easy, to argue that growing inequality is a problem. Frankly, even Jeb Bush, that well-known socialist about to stand for president for the Republicans, now accepts that inequality is a problem. I believe that those who use the language of inequality have a responsibility to focus on its causes, and even more on the response that it requires. And let me try to do that now. My argument is that tackling inequality and rebuilding London as a city of opportunity for all depends on tackling two fundamental problems. The first concerning the role of markets, the second concerning our shared culture. The first problem is the dominance of global markets over every aspect of life, and especially the distortionary effect of financial and housing markets on the lives of Londoners. Being swayed by the winds of global trends is an inevitable reality of being in a globalised city. On one level, this has brought great benefits to our capital. Immigrants are the lifeblood of the London economy, and our public services are also increasingly reliant on imported labour. 40% of London nurses were born overseas. This city works best when it opens its arms to the rest of the world. It's why I believe it is reckless folly for the current mayor of London to be campaigning for quotas on immigration and a withdrawal from the European Union, something that his own economic advisor said would cost London up to 210 billion in lost investment. And it's why I will continue to tackle the poison of UKIP when it comes to the debate on immigration. But at the same time, we cannot continue to pretend that globalisation has benefited everyone. For millions of Londoners, without a Russell Group degree or an exclusive vocational qualification, without the access to assets that still overwhelmingly determine your life chances, globalisation means little more than an undercut wage in a dead-end job, a breakdown of community, and a shattered dream of buying a home. My point here is that the workings of global markets exercise too much influence on the distribution of life chances and life outcomes in London. The distortions and injustices created by these global market dynamics are too great to be accepted without challenge. They are wrong not just because they make life harder for so many people, but also because they threaten our future success. By increasing inequality and narrowing the pathways of opportunity, they make it harder for London's real economy to be creative, dynamic, and self-renewing. 73% of London business leaders now think the housing crisis is a significant threat to London's economic success, and they are right. And the boom in part-time, low-paid work is a continuing drag on productivity and growth in our economy. The second problem arising from the two revolutions is an atomized, materialistic culture in which shared bonds of solidarity and aspiration are eroded by cynicism, competition, and mistrust. In today's London, our common culture has too much narcissism and alienation, too much status driven by wealth rather than talent, and not enough recognition of authenticity and work. This culture manifests itself in an overemphasis on personal choice and consumption, and a corresponding underinvestment in shared relationships. Nothing illustrated the limits of our culture more viscerally than the 2011 riots, in which thousands of people took part in the burning, looting, and destruction of high streets, businesses, and houses in their local communities. As I argued in my book that I published just after the riots, the tragedy is that the common experience of hard work and low pay, of cramped houses and overburdened services is a source of division, not solidarity. The scramble for resources, homes, jobs, and school places drives a wedge between those who have the least. But it manifests itself not just in extreme outbreaks of violence or in a widespread sense of alienation, but in a range of ubiquitous occurrences across the city. From the passenger who thoughtlessly blares out loud music on the tube, to the way we often look right through the homeless person asking for our help, or wait for someone else to give up their seat for the elderly. In a rhetoric of rights, our responsibilities to each other have been ignored, and whilst these two problems of markets and culture arise from global revolutions of the past, we must recognise that they also stem from the political legacy that continues to cast a long shadow. The shadow I'm preoccupied with, of course, is the legacy of Thatcherism. Thatcher and her followers embraced a trickle-down economics that told us that marketisation would bring prosperity for all. But as we look around London today, we see just how wrong they were. 28% of Londoners now live in poverty. Doesn't that show where an over-reliance on markets has left us? This matters because our city is still being shaped today by the impacts of that political legacy. It's present in modern conservatism, in the values and priorities that Boris Johnson has pursued as mayor, and in the impacts on Londoners of David Cameron and George Osborne's, I almost said Gideon Osborne's policies. It's visible in the refusal to acknowledge, let alone do anything about, the effects of growing inequality on Londoners and our communities. And it can be seen in their insistence that the shape of London's economy and who benefits from it are things over which the government can exercise no influence, while all the time their friends and associates are being rewarded and privileged and favoured by government decisions. And it is present in the literal reshaping of London's population, as house prices drive ordinary families out of their communities and Tory welfare policies literally force people from their homes and their city. This is the legacy that Boris Johnson wants to take to Westminster. And we have to fight it not just on the level of policies, but at the level of assumptions and values. We have to argue for a different path, a different future, a different city. And I want to say something about that path. My starting point is a simple idea, but one that I believe has profound implications. The idea is this, that the key to London's future is the recognition that individual freedom and opportunity are, in fact, a collective achievement. Cities are founded not on individuals working alone, but on a disparate mass of people rubbing shoulders. An urban life is all about learning to live together successfully. London thrives because it's a melting pot of different cultures, languages, and talents. A place where capital and goods and ideas are exchanged and individuals become more than the sum of their parts. Our diversity is the source of our dynamism. But we can only be successful if, as individuals, we can gain the respect and the support of those around us. And we can only thrive as a community if we're able to meet our shared needs fairly and sustainably in ways that also serve personal aspiration and opportunity. This is the genius of the city when it works. To make it work, we have to renew our shared relationships and build systems and institutions that support all of us as we seek to live our lives in the 21st century. We rebuild London as a city of opportunity for all Londoners, not by leaving individuals to their own devices, but by building a shared framework of education, jobs, and homes that enables everyone to be free without obstacles to realise their potential. A successful city is one in which the dynamism of competition and choice is matched by the strength of sharing and cooperation surrounding our individual lives. That is what the freedom of the city means. That every individual has the opportunity to pursue their own dreams and to access the shared resources, the knowledge and the support of the metropolis. The freedom of the city is not just an abstract idea, it's a concrete practice too. The first freedom of the city of London was in 1237. It was originally conferred freedom to go about one's business peacefully and without interference, free from serfdom and exploitation at the hands of others. Crucially, it is a freedom that the city government could grant and guarantee on the basis of the legitimacy, the resources, and the collective identity that the city itself created. Our city today is very different to how it was 800 years ago, but the concept of the freedom of the city is just as relevant to our life and the needs of Londoners as it was then. Today, though, we must reinterpret it and expand it to reach all Londoners. 70 years ago, William Beveridge named 5 giants to be slain by the post-war settlement. Every Briton should be entitled to freedom from want, idleness, disease, squalor, and ignorance. Those 5 giants have not been vanquished, but significant progress has been made on all of them. But I believe we now need to step outside of that framework to see the great challenges that lie ahead for London. And I would argue that to achieve the freedom of the city in our time, there are 4 broad freedoms that require attention of our national and city leaders. The freedom from exploitation, freedom from isolation and indifference, the freedom to live in safety and security, and the freedom to shape our own lives. The first freedom, the freedom from exploitation. This means making sure that people's dignity and interests are protected in any exchanges that they might enter into. It means recognizing that a choice between eviction and a loan shark is no real choice. A choice between 2 bad jobs is no real choice. A choice between another 20% rent rise or constantly moving from home to home is no real choice. None of these reflect relationships built on give and take. They're about the powerful bullying and exploiting the powerless. The most obvious example of this is our broken housing system, which is the main cause of economic hardship in London and poses the biggest challenge to the next mayor. London's poverty rate is now 8% higher than the national average. That discrepancy disappears entirely once housing costs are removed from the equation. But the housing crisis cannot be tackled with half-hearted solutions, headline-grabbing gimmicks, or meaningless tinkering. It needs a coherent, broad plan with some radical measures and a mayor who is willing to stand up frankly, to vested interests who want to maintain the status quo. These measures must include being honest about the need to build on some parts of the Greenbelt. It is wrong that we are forced to sell off playing fields and public parks in inner London to preserve areas of wasteland, car parks and disused quarries in outer London that could provide a much greater public benefit. They must include redefining affordable housing to less than the 80% of market value that Boris Johnson deems affordable, and linking affordable rents to average local earnings. It must also involve the lifting of the borrowing cap so that local councils can fund a new generation of council homes instead of the mere 40 council homes that were built in London last year. It means rent caps and compulsory landlord registration to protect tenants from the most exploitative landlords, and it should include the introduction of a London value tax in the form of a stamp duty surcharge on wealthy foreign buyers who leave their nest egg London properties empty. But widespread exploitation is not limited to our housing market. It is just as visible in our labour market, where 650,000 Londoners struggle to make a living in low-paid jobs without few advancement prospects, while many others are paid less than their talents deserve. In the immediate term, tackling this means two things. It means, of course, encouraging London employers to pay their staff a living wage, as I have been doing through my Fairness in Football campaign that's focused on football clubs that pay their cleaners in 1 year what a player earns in the course of one match. It means using the powers of public institutions to withhold public contracts from companies that refuse to pay their staff fairly, and it means pushing for the introduction of a London minimum wage, as I called for back in 2013, that reflects the significantly higher living costs in this city. But both of these measures are ultimately proxy solutions for a deeper, more fundamental problem with the nature of the London economy. Let's be clear here. Creating good quality, skilled and well-paid jobs for Londoners is the only way to tackle the scourge of low pay that leaves working people in our city earning less than a living wage. The problem of low pay stems from a glut of minimum wage, dead-end jobs, largely in areas like retail and customer service. Today, 88% of all jobs in London are in the service sector. In the last 20 years, there has been a huge rise in the number of low-skilled, low-paid, while the number of skilled jobs has plummeted. The Mayor has the power to refocus the London economy towards the highly skilled sectors that will make up the industries of the future: tech, science, advanced manufacturing, and the creative industries. Other cities are already doing this. In New York, the Brooklyn Naval Dockyard, a disused dockyard, has been turned into a hub of urban manufacturing and design, housing 300 companies and creating 6,500 jobs in growing industries. We should have a similar focus on creating new jobs in modern industries in this city. The skilled jobs currently being created in Brooklyn could just as well be going to workers in Barking and Bexley. I applaud, of course, the Silicon roundabout at Old Street, but it's one roundabout. The scale of the vision that's required in a city moving to 10 million has to step up over the coming years. The second freedom is the freedom from isolation and indifference. If families disintegrate, if workers do not have a voice, if neighbourhoods are divided and strangers fear and mistrust one another, then what happens? We end up willing the ends for social justice, but the means are impossible. People retreat into their own lives, and any sense of common good disappears. This risks creating a working class with no stake in capitalism and a middle class that feels cheated by the welfare state. Too easily, a language of individual rights can regress into a shrill and antisocial individualism. London, at its worst, is an atomised, alienating metropolis in which people live side by side but never together. Neighbours share little more than a postcode, visiting the same offices, travelling on the same buses and eating in the same restaurants, but without the mutual supportive relationships that were so crucial in enabling my mother and myself to succeed. That people living in London are more likely than anywhere else in the UK to report feelings of isolation and suffer from mental health problems tells us all we need to know. As our population speeds towards 10 million, the risks of isolation and atomisation become ever more real. That is why the next mayor must find new ways to build strong communities across the city. This can be achieved through simple solutions such as creating new shared spaces for people to gather and establishing new cultural institutions beyond those in Zone 1. And it can be achieved by making it easier for Londoners to regularly travel throughout the city, rather than being trapped in their communities by transport fares that are now by far the highest in Europe and have risen 55% under the current mayor. It means pushing ahead with Crossrail 2 and the Bakerloo line extension and the Piccadilly line upgrades to make all parts of our city as accessible and connected as they can be. Cycling too provides a great option for people to access shared facilities across the city, something that's hampered by a continued failure to make London streets safe for cyclists. But communities are not just loose concepts. They should be rooted around real institutions. This is why the mayor must use his empowering capability, promoting a kind of hyper-devolution that would bring communities together by giving them more of a say about what happens in their area. It's why it's an outrage that local communities have so little power to stop the rise of betting shops and payday lenders littering our high streets. A healthy, prosperous city is one with a sense of community, shared identity, and mutual support. The idea of London as a collection of villages is not incompatible with a globalised world city. Third is the freedom to live in safety and security. This is the most basic freedom of all, but policing in London is facing unprecedented pressures, following a string of scandals and budget cuts of 1.4 billion. I've already made clear that I would raise the GLA precept by about £12 per Londoner per year to fund the reinstatement of the 2,500 police officers lost under Boris Johnson. And last month, I released a report highlighting the importance of tackling property crime, theft, criminal damage, fraud, and shoplifting that blights the lives of many, many Londoners on a day-to-day basis. Too often these crimes are seen as victimless because they affect the least powerful in our society, and that must stop. I've long argued that creating a safe city means building a police force that truly reflects London in terms of diversity and institutional knowledge. The Met should consist of Londoners policing Londoners, all overseen by a strong, powerful system of transparency and accountability. This need for safety and security is particularly important for our young people who face instability in a city that is an increasingly difficult place to grow up. It's partly why we need a new focus on supporting families and young people in London. I've already said, for example, that I want to see the creation of 1,000 play streets, roads closed to traffic, to provide a safe place for young people to play and to foster community interaction. It means protecting the funding of youth services across the city, intervening to fill the gap left by the closure of Sure Start centres, and not settling, frankly, for an Olympic legacy that for far too many Londoners means little more than a closed-down running track, overgrown football pitches, and dilapidated basketball and tennis courts. Above all, though, these freedoms all contribute to a fourth freedom for which all humanity shares a deep hunger, the freedom to shape our own lives. Our success as a city should be measured not just in economic output or population side, but by how free Londoners are to fulfil their dreams and reach their potential. The fundamental promise of the city is that, through sharing and exchange between people, we can create new possibilities for ourselves and each other, and that is why the opportunity to take part in this exchange is at the core of my vision for London. It is why our focus on the education of Londoners is so paramount. London schools are now the best in the country, but this is not the time for complacency. Young Londoners compete for jobs not just against their peers in Southampton and Sheffield, but also those in Chicago and Shanghai. So we need a new London challenge to make London schools the very best, not just nationally, but internationally too. That should include building a new generation of new schools to prevent the 150,000 school places shortfall that we face by 2018. But it also means a renewed focus on further education, including new night schools to train working Londoners in the skills they need to climb the career ladder. These colleges would open from early in the morning until late at night to provide affordable and accessible courses to all Londoners. Find me an FE college. FE colleges that have just had their budget cut by 24%, that's open from 8 o'clock tonight, and I'll give you a beer. Other than Birkbeck round the corner and a couple of others, they just don't exist anymore for adult Londoners. It also means apprenticeships that are worthy of the name, with a focus on quality as well as quantity. Our focus on education cannot just mean young people. It must involve building a system that means that every single Londoner, whoever they are, whatever their background and their age, can continue to learn, improve, and get on. Reinterpreting the freedom of the city and making it real for all Londoners offers a way to address the problems we face. I want to suggest that implementing this in practice requires two complementary responses. First, we must be prepared to use legitimate public power to shape markets where they do not meet the public interest. And second, to create a broader, more diverse and dynamic network of association and participation to help our shared problems. London has shown many times that it can rise to great challenges, from our responses to the disaster of the 7/7 bombings to the triumph of the 2012 Olympics. To do that today, we must focus more sharply on the new solutions and the shared institutions that can make this great city work for generations to come. That will allow us to move forward into the 21st century together, united, confident of our continued success, ready to meet the challenges we face and building a vibrant, dynamic city of opportunity and freedom that leaves no Londoner behind. Thank you very much.
David has kindly agreed to take questions for about half an hour, so I've got one first, so get through. I mean, a number of the things you've suggested there in this vision for a city where, in some ways, you want to change the way people live together will involve the mayor getting other institutions to do things. Some of what you've described is within the mayor's purview of power. Some of it would require the mayor to change the borough's behaviour, or the mayor to change national government behaviour. Just to take one stark example, if you were a Labour mayor, it is true that UKIP's policy on immigration and the risk of Britain leaving the EU would have profound impacts on immigration. But I mean, the Labour Party's policies nationally are less warm towards immigration than the ones you just put forward. So, if you were running for Mayor of London, would you have to take the National Labour Party turn about issues such as policy to do with immigration? And second, would you have to, as it were, get the national government and the boroughs to do things that otherwise they wouldn't be doing?
Yes. I mean, you know, I've disagreed publicly with the Labour leadership on immigration. I think that a language that says something like, and I can't quite remember it, that, you know, all frontline workers have to speak English, is just not what I recognise. What I recognise is the female constituent from somewhere across the world that comes into my surgery, that breaks down in tears, and that says to me, Mr. Lammy, can you please write to my university because I failed one module in my nursing degree. I've been doing it for 3 years, part-time, juggling work, I've got 3 kids, and I've just got to pass this degree. And I go back to my office, and with my team, I get on the phone to the Vice-Chancellor, or I write to the Vice-Chancellor, and I say, please, give this nurse a break. You can't become a frontline worker without that English. So it is deeply deceptive, I think, the language that we've fallen into because of this lurch to the right. We should remember that at its best, this country and many people in this country and many people in the broader Commonwealth that included my ancestors fought fascism. It is very, very easy as you head towards an election time, speaking to folk in our seaside towns, blighted, deprived, with real issues, very easy to say to them that if you're finding that your living costs are rising but your wage isn't, if your son or daughter can't get on the housing ladder and can't get a council house, if unemployment is soaring in your area, really, really easy to say the reason for that is the immigrants, and the solution to that is to pull out of Europe. I wish it were that simple. It is so much more complicated, and my view is the Labour Party's got to be in that place, in the complications, taking on the vested interests in relation to our globalised economy. So, as I've said in this speech, those that go to Russell Group universities like this one, those who are baby boomers, and there are a few in this audience, those who are Gen Xers like me and the 3 party leaders, free education, full employment, the ability to buy your own home, and a nice pension. London is fantastic. Best place on the planet to be. But if you're not inside that, it's much harder. And that means a mayor that hasn't got all the powers, because there's obviously, we know, as you so fantastically led this debate, we know the mayor needs far greater power, but we also know that both through Ken Livingstone and through Boris Johnson, the mayor has a massive, massive pulpit on which to influence public debate and discussion. Now, this mayor has used that to get to number 10, and very stupidly, David Cameron has let him even further through the door yesterday. I don't want to go to number 10. I either want to be the MP for Tottenham or I want to be mayor, but I would use that pulpit to challenge and push and have some of this discussion.
Okay, very good. Now, usual rules? Yes, one here, you guys there. If you want to say you are, you have to, but it'd be nice to yes, in front.
Hi David, my name's Sian Morgan. I work for London First. As you know, because we speak to you about this a lot, housing is one of the biggest issues, not just from a social perspective, but also from an economic perspective. I think you recognise that. You used a stat from one of our reports, about 73% of business leaders recognising housing as a significant threat to our economic competitiveness. But the reality is that for years and years now, we've had housing targets after housing targets that have gone up from 32 to 42 to 49,000. But in reality, we're only reaching about 25,000 homes a year, so nowhere near what it is that we need. You've put forward some ideas for how you'd release surplus public land, reconsider how we use the Greenbelt. But what would you do to make these targets bite and to make sure that there's responsibility put on local authorities for actually delivering them? Because I think everybody here will agree that housing is a real significant threat to London's social and economic competitiveness.
Well, thank you for the question. And it does get, obviously in Tony's question, he also raised local authorities, Labour local authorities. We're never going to meet the targets. We're not going to meet the targets because the system is fundamentally broken. And let me be absolutely clear about this. When the system, our economy, was fundamentally broken in 2008, we used £500 billion of taxpayers' money to bail out the banks and structurally refix the system. The housing market is structurally broken. It's going to take some pretty radical change to alter that. I think you've got to slow down what's happening in the rental sector as well as build for rent. That's why I think that rent caps are essential. I've said what I've said on Greenbelt. No other candidate so far has said that. I've published more detail in both my housing report and the recent report on crime than any other candidate in this race and any other candidate ever running for mayor at this stage. They'll probably still say he hasn't got enough policy. But it's all there and then we build on it. But let me just be absolutely clear about some other things. A London that builds 40 council houses last year is a London that's failing. We get George Osborne stand up at the budget. He announces this silly IPSA scheme. Well, I mean, it's not silly. It's a small contribution. But if the average London house is £470,000 and the average wage is £36,000, then an IPSA effective deposit scheme of £15,000, it's going to take you years to get to £15,000. You might be able to find £1,500 a year, but £15,000 a year on a salary of £36,000? And that's to get to the deposit of £75,000. That's at today's rate. So it's always away from you. We've got to build council houses, and I'm afraid my view as the mayor would be, the state has got to get back into the business of subsidy and funding. The state has got to zone and be far more prescriptive about that accommodation. The 80% target is wrong on affordability, but I might say there is something perverse about a situation in which 95% of taxpayers' money that is spent on housing goes on housing benefit. 95% of those of you who are paying taxes, your money is basically topping up landlords' income. What's that about? So that, the mayor has got to challenge that. You've got to push government to deal with that problem. You've got to get back to building council homes. We're now in a situation where housing associations obviously want social homes and are doing their best, but the numbers there too have fallen away. So there's a group of Londoners, and it's a large group of Londoners, 2.4 million, frankly, who need social homes. And there's a group of Londoners for whom affordability is just way, way beyond where they would need to be. You can only intervene by changing supply. You can only change supply by Greenbelt. There are some who will I don't know what they're saying when they effectively say that we can do it all by brownfield. We can't do it all by brownfield. You can't possibly do it all by brown. And then you get the tall building brigade that want to transform the London skyline. Usually, when you scratch beneath the surface of these tall building merchants, they've never lived in a tower block in their lives. Well, I remember standing on that floor, looking out of that Croydon block in the Broadwater Farm estate. And so there's another issue, that we are building tall buildings, but the majority of that housing is for two-bedroomed flats. That's not family housing. The pressure is on family housing. So again, let us get on to how we build that family housing and zone for it. So radical, radical change.
Would you effectively require boroughs that don't use the London plan to require boroughs that are resistant to building housing to build more housing?
Well, the mayor has taken, in this last week, the mayor has taken on more planning powers. What I would say is this, and I've just got to put it absolutely clear, because this is what ordinary members of the public say to me. It is a scandal that local authorities are being gutted and starved as funds in the way that they are. But it's frankly also a scandal that local authorities are rolling over on viability time and time again. And even where we've got public land, we're settling for 14, 10, 15% affordability on Boris's targets, which aren't affordable. That is not a London that's sustainable, and my God, I hope we elect a Labour mayor that's actually going to do something about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lots of questions, Sally. Take three, take those two, and then
yeah, David, you spoke a few times in your speech about what you called a my rights culture, and you said about shrill individualism. Can you just sort of explain a bit what you meant by that, just with some examples and what you do about it as mayor?
Hi, David. You've talked today and previously you've criticised Boris's fares increases. You've talked, like I think all the candidates, about reducing the burden on Londoners. But you're also calling for Crossrail 2, and you're calling for development in Greenbelt where there isn't currently any transport infrastructure. How are you going to fund those projects that you need to join up the communities that you're going to build to the jobs that they're going to need to travel into if you're not in favour of charging people fares to pay for them?
Well, the first thing to say is that as the modelling for Crossrail 2 is going forward, it's very clear, and London First did a very good piece of work on this, that we will have to fund much of that project from within London. And that is about the use of Sills, it's about business rates. We've seen that, in fact, with Crossrail 1, but we'll have to go further, I suspect. The second thing is the work that Tony has done on the Finance Commission and the need for the mayor to have more fiscal power. Hang on a minute, let me finish.
Increase the amount of money available for that. That's the key part of the report. Is it doesn't increase the total amount of money available to London. That just simply gives us more control. The pie isn't bigger. If you're going to create new communities on the Greenbelt, then you need to join them up into the centre so people can come in for leisure and for work, and you've got no local businesses there to levy Sills on.
Let me finish the point. It is the case that the funding mechanism will have to change. We've seen that development in the budget in relation to Manchester. I would be very, very surprised if we don't see progress coming to London. Clearly, the Mayor of London has not got the power currently, and it would be slightly strange if he ever got the power to demand building on Greenbelt beyond his own borders. Some of the Greenbelt is within London, but much of it is outside of London. So that does require a new national consensus. But at the moment, if I'm selected as the mayor, I would be the first mayor to actually push this issue in major public debate. And I think that is significant. So you're right that if you are to build new areas of our country, then it requires transport, it requires design and space, just as it did after the war when Britain built 11 new towns. But the bottom line is the vision of this government is one, Ebbsfleet. My view is you've got to be bigger than that. So that's not just an issue for the mayor, it's got to be an issue in partnership around the mayor. And I say the system, the starting point has got to be reviewed. On fares, look, we're not yet in the short campaign. Let's get to the short campaign. I think one of the candidates has got a policy on fares. I don't know if she's costed that policy, but I intend to cost mine, so I'm not making an announcement tonight.
The first point, the prior point, remind me what the first one was.
No, it's just you were talking about...
oh yes, sorry, individual.
My rights culture.
In a sense, I pick up a theme that I arrived at in my book. And that is that, for me, it's not all about the individual, and it's not all about individualism. And at its worst, there is something that connects the young person that puts his foot through a Footlocker to get that pair of trainers, to the MP that helps himself to a duck house on the state, to the banker that helps himself to a bonus. It's the my rights. I'll have that. And somewhere we have to get back to a collective ideal and what we share, because in the end, cities are great because of the shared forces that come together. It's why I'm so concerned at youth service cuts across the city. Because there are many young people growing up in environments where for them the youth service is as powerful as the school, frankly. I didn't learn to read because I lived in a home with lots of fancy middle-class books. The only books we had in my home were Mills and Boon. I didn't really like those racy Mills and Boons. My mum liked them. And we had very proudly the Encyclopedia Britannica, which of course this is long before Google. So the library was absolutely, I spent hours and hours and hours at the library. It was really, really important. These shared spaces are vital. When I say we need new institutions for learning, for adults, I really, really mean it. Our national debate about education is all about young people. We will go into the general election and understandably there'll be a lot of discussion of tuition fees and university students. But my God, what about those 20 and 30-somethings stuck in a dead-end job of which there are so many in our city? How are they meant to progress if FE budgets have been cut by almost 50% over this last period, and where there is no courses, there's no vision of night schools or a place to go to study out so that you can work by day and study in the evening? If you go to New York City, the city college and the night school is still a very, very powerful vehicle for social mobility. We tend to be obsessed in this country with mobility from one generation to the next generation and not for the mobility of the individual. We need new shared institutions to get that individual to his full potential. So that's why I say that and this is obviously in a visionary sense, an intellectual sense, that the individual rights ideal can feel very shrill and very hollow if it ends in a place where you're effectively left to your own devices, we become very atomized, and we can't come back together again. Look, in the end, I'm putting on the table an old idea in a fresh way. The old idea is solidarity. And I think it's very powerful. I think it's what makes the city work.
Okay, now, right, the questioner here, in fairness, and take the one over there, and then next door.
Hi David, Dan McCurry, Bethnal Green and Bow, Labour Party. I'm interested because I think you said something about foreigners buying properties and then not occupying them. and I believe you said something about they should be charged or taxed in some additional way. The reason in particular that I'm interested in this, because looking at the Nine Elms development, which is next to Battersea, the 3 sales offices for these thousands of flats are in 3 Chinese cities. To sell flats in London, you could just open a shop in Battersea and sell a whole lot of them. And it occurs to me the only reason they're selling them in China is because if people don't occupy the flats and you're charging them 5,000, 10,000 a year service charges, it's kind of free money, isn't it? If they're not there, it's actually massively more profitable. But it doesn't help London at all. It's really damaging for London. So when Boris says it's great to have foreigners who come in and invest in this way, actually it's really quite damaging. They're taking away more than what they're putting in. So I believe you did say something about what you would do about foreigners buying up flats and then not using them or renting them out. I'd like to hear more details if that's the case.
Okay, very good. Stamp duty surcharge, I think I heard, but one minute there. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Megan Jarvie from Child Poverty Action Group. I was really interested in what you said on housing and wages and how that's trapping families in poverty. We see a third element as well, which is childcare, the cost availability, which would prevent people like your mum from being able to go to night school now. And I was just wondering if that was something you recognise and what you would want to do about it.
And can I just take a third one?
Crossrail is going to put up house prices by about 600% in areas like Whitechapel. That's going to put a pressure on council house prices. It's also going to put pressure on big communities such as the big Bangladeshi community. You say that you're going to put a cap on rent prices, but what are you going to do about the practicalities when private investors do want to buy up houses in areas where house prices are going to go up by 600% and things like that?
Okay. 3 good, clear questions.
Very, very good questions. What I absolutely recognise what you're saying about foreign buyers. Now, I remember a London in the late 70s, 80s, where the population was falling, people were leaving, it was not a place you wanted to stay. So I'm not in a place where it is not, I want to encourage people to come to our city. I recognise the position of London as a global magnet. Of course, people will choose to invest in London, just as Londoners choose to invest in other cities and buy properties and all the rest of it. And, there's quite a lot of middle-class Londoners who've got homes in the south of France and Italy and all the rest of it. But equity and fairness, and that is why I suggested a land value tax. It would start at the sort of top tier, which is 925,000 of the new stamp duty tier, and it would kick in if you are not resident in the property, and you determine that through council tax effectively, which shows whether it's actually being letted out or not. Now, my view is that you've got to incentivise that property being used. And actually, whilst 925,000 sounds quite high, actually 925,000 now is not so high. There are two 3-bedroom properties in London for that sort of value, many. So the point is, let us constantly be looking at the equity in this and the fairness. Bill de Blasio has begun this in New York because there are profound problems in Manhattan. My view is that Boris and obviously David Cameron are far too laissez-faire about where that equity and where that balance lies. You're right about Crossrail. So we've got this slightly perverse things happening. Boris flips his hair back, gets stressed out, and says, oh my God, we're not building affordable homes. He then says, well, I know what we need a housing zone. Let's create a housing zone. Let's have 10 housing zones, and we'll build some affordable homes. What happens when he creates the housing zone? Instantly, land values go up. Instantly, it's like, oh, I'm right in the area. Tottenham Hale. Can't wait. And guess what? The affordable housing that he wanted does not get built at the proportion that he intended, if he ever intended it, really, but that's another question. You get the Crossrail 2 development. I've just come from a presentation at Savills, the chartered surveying company. Very good presentation on developments along the new Crossrail 2 line. And again, it's the same issue of land values and house prices. So there are issues of equity, and there are issues about, you know, there was a property developer there that explained buying some land and getting consent. The whole pressure was to get planning consent on this land. He bought it for 10 million. He got the consent, and the minute he gets the planning consent, it's now worth 25 million. There are a lot of people making a lot of money, and there's no clawback. None of it's coming back. So in looking at, for example, how you make the infrastructure investments that we're going to need in London, we will need to look further down the line, I suspect, at how that money comes back into the system, particularly to build genuinely affordable homes. But very strangely, you speak to property developers, I mean, 70% of what is built in Britain is built by one of 23 companies, by the way. So there's not a lot of property developers. But you speak, increasingly, I find that they're more radical than the politicians. They are saying the state needs to be more prescriptive about what we should build, how you should build, and the market will meet that. At the moment, the state isn't prescriptive. So, look, I wouldn't have all the power as mayor, but you can see the direction of travel and where I'm coming from.
There was the childcare question.
The childcare question. Forgive me, I have a 1-year-old who wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning, and so sometimes I forget the third question. Thank you for raising that question. You're absolutely right. The average cost of childcare is £15,000 in London. And very, very sadly, most parents who are making decisions about childcare are not making those decisions on the basis of quality. They're making those decisions on the basis of cost solely. In what I set out, and I wasn't able to go into detail, this isn't a full policy prescription, but when I talked about, you know, the freedom of the city and the emphasis that we have to place on family life, whether it's youth services, whether it's early years, whether it's the 1,000 play streets, the bottom line is, can we make London the best city in the world in which to be a young person? Can we have that ambition? And if we had that ambition, where would it take us? A key component part of that must be childcare. That obviously places huge demands on national government, but the mayor, the mayor can play a role in at least helping part of that journey. I don't think it can be the whole cost of childcare. That probably doesn't fall to the mayor, but it's a real issue.
Right. Question here, and one there, and then one there. Okay. We'll wait for a microphone to you.
I'll write questions down.
Thank you. My name's Mike Stock. I want to ask you about something else. Housing is a big issue. It's very hard to fix. Can I talk to you about health, David? Lord Darsai was asked by the mayor 18 months ago to come up with a plan for London. Having looked at what the Health Board have put forward on about a dozen major issues, I wonder where you would apply the limited amount of influence that a London mayor would have. What can you do about a sort of healthier London?
Very good.
I'd add to that, Chair, we bid for what Greater Manchester's been given for the mayor effectively to take over the health service in London, if I can go further.
Hi, I've got a question. Yes. I've got a question you haven't touched upon, and that is the airport. No doubt the airport, the Heathrow runway is going to be, a very, controversial topic. I wonder where you're going to stand on that. Are you going to, support it, or, something like that?
Two short questions. Do you think house prices should fall in London, and by how much? And is there a limit to how big London should be in proportion to the rest of the country?
What we've seen go to Manchester does need to be replicated in London, that works for London and recognises that we've got 33 boroughs here, slightly different structures. But what is clear to me is that there is a sort of strategic piece in relation to health that's currently missing. The first thing is the huge fragmentation now with CCCGs, or whatever they're called, NHS England, public health in local authority. It is such a smorgasbord. The coordination across London is missing. And of course the mayor is in a fantastic position to actually coordinate better across the city. So I thought Darcy's work was very good. Boris has begun this, to be fair, he commissioned it, and I think that we must build on it and absolutely move it forward. An example of this, frankly, is I am really, really worried that as London moves to a 10 million population, we're seeing so many hospital closures across the city and a kind of downgrading in particular areas of healthcare. A mayor's got to have the strategic view to make sure that you haven't got the sort of lottery in healthcare that I think currently exists. On airport expansion, I was actually very keen on Stansted. Look, maybe as the MP for Tottenham, the North East Corridor, I thought there was lots of scope for Stansted Airport, particularly if you could speed up the line from Liverpool Street and Stratford up to the airport. It's been left out, so we've got to see where Davies comes to. But my strong view is that we do need to increase airport capacity. I'm absolutely clear about that we need to get on with it. But I don't think we'll be able to get on with it unless we have a powerful solution that commands public confidence on pollution and noise. And the current framework on pollution and noise is not good enough. I put down an EDM, a motion in Parliament on a noise regulator. We might need to go further than that. So in determining which airport is right, and I'll wait to see where he lands, we must also very, very clearly demonstrate to the public at large that we've dealt with the noise and the pollution issue. I think it's sort of fundamental economics that if you can increase supply, then you'll take the sting out of the bubble. I'm afraid I haven't got a crystal ball, so I can't predict for you, and it'd be very interesting to find an economist who can, in this great institution, how much it might fall by. And I'm not sure fall is quite the right way to put it. But clearly, you have to increase supply. And my view is you won't increase supply unless, one, the state gets back into the game in some shape or form, and two, you're opening up land, and that land's got to be beyond the brownfield. That's why we've had the debate about Greenfield. Now, look, it's important to recognise that we've only this year gone back to the population we were in 1939. So if Nigel Farage were here, he would say that Britain's full up. He would say that London's full up. But in fact, we're actually back at a population we were previously. And the nature of global cities is that we are headed to 10 million, and that is not a bad thing, as long as people can move and come and into and out of the city. And people, people will make individual choices about where they want. Some people want to live in the suburbs. Some people want to be able to commute in from home counties that are close to the city. They don't want to pay exorbitant train fares, but they want to be able to do that. They make those choices, and I think as master planners have to account for that. But we also have to be realistic. It's why I want to be absolutely clear that most families do not want to live on the 15th or 16th floor of a tower block. So for me, it's not a problem being a 10 million city, but it links to another point. It is not all about London. It isn't all about London. The north-south divide in Britain is very, very real. The problems along our coastlines is very, very real. Whole communities beyond London that have no access to the global market is a significant issue. But let us be clear, these are real issues in constituencies like mine in the city. So we mustn't give the impression that the streets of London are paved with gold and everything should move somewhere else. The biggest mistake of this coalition was to get rid of those regional development agencies. They were moving things forward in the northeast. In the south, they were absolutely focused. In fact, you could argue that you know, some of the regional ones beyond were more successful than the London Development Agency, but we got rid of them. That was a huge mistake, and you know, it's my hope that Labour government brings something back that is really determined for growth in those. Now, Manchester's a big difference. It's only Manchester. There's a lot more to do. But I think it is the job of the mayor also to communicate powerfully what London does, particularly in relation to its supply chain in those other cities. You know, Crossrail 2 and Crossrail 1, you know, so much of what will produce is not being built in London, it's being built in other cities. So just as you see those posters across the tube advertising what the Mayor of London's doing, actually we should be present in other cities, communicating our connection to those cities. And certainly not in competition with Birmingham, Manchester, Sheffield and Leeds, but in partnership with those cities.
Now, David, it's 2 minutes to 8 according to that clock, which is quite accurate, actually, by LSE standards. So, do you want to take another...
It's up to you. It's up to you.
Let's see. One there. Right, one there.
Two more.
Hi, my name's Kieran. I've lived in London for about 4 years now, and for a lot of that time I've spent cycling around central London. My home city of Edinburgh has just voted in the City Council to introduce 20-mile-an-hour speed limits on over 80% of the city's roads. I was wondering if you had any ideas to have a similarly radical approach to making London more safe to cycle in, whether that's by changing the speed limits, whether it's by banning traffic from certain parts like they've done in Paris, whether it's by making public transport more affordable or increasing the congestion charge, because just painting blue lines on the side of busy roads is not enough at the moment.
Would you take two to go? Was that it? Was that it? Okay.
Hi. You spoke a bit about the state getting more involved in housing and feeling that it had been absent from that sector, but just wondered sort of how you saw that panning out because of the emergence of problems like poor doors, if you're familiar with that term.
So I've just got to reveal a kind of bias. I am not a driver. I failed my driving test on at least 4 occasions. I passed just after the riots, in fact. I could be found driving up Barnet High Street learning to drive. But frankly, I am such a crap driver, I do not drive. So I rely really heavily on public transport and take my kids all over the place with public transport, and I do also cycle. But I tend to cycle usually with the family. You know, the great thing about living in Tottenham area is that the canals. You can go all the way up to Hertford. My own view is the safety issue is fundamental, and we've just not made enough progress. But the truth is prioritisation. We've not settled yet, really, where the balance should lie. And I think that there has to be some readdressing of that balance back to pedestrians, hence my plan for pedestrianising streets for our kids to own again, but also towards cyclists. I would also say that it doesn't make sense to me that only 1% of the budget of TfL is spent on cycling. I would also say I'm really worried about cycling proficiency. You know, local authorities used to do a lot. You know, a certain generation can remember doing that cycling proficiency and all that stuff. It's all fallen away. So we can't also have a lottery of just getting onto a bike and not actually knowing the rules. So there are real issues around proficiency, and there are also issues around ethnic profile and who is cycling and where they're cycling and why they're not cycling. So there's quite a lot to do. There is a move actually towards 20 miles an hour, largely being led by local authorities, in fact. But I don't think that's the whole solution. Until you've got more to say about who takes priority, until you're investing in a much bigger way in budgetary terms around cycling, until you've landed the proficiency and the ability to cycle, you know, well, until you've also dealt with some of the challenges as to why certain groups seem less willing to cycle, I don't think we're arriving at the city that we can and should be. You know, we've got to a system where, as I've sort of indicated, where local authorities are so strapped for money that they too, and actually there is a pressure on public services to get best value with their land, that they too want the highest price, which of course drives down the affordability. But there is also, there's also, I think, real issues about being outmaneuvered, outlawyered, overrun by certain developers. And the business of poor doors takes the city back to a sort of Victorian era where there was one thing for one and another thing for another. So, I mean, I spoke out heavily against this a few years ago. When I talk about state intervention, some of that is about equipping local authorities with the capacity and the mayor's office with the capacity. Don't forget, Boris gutted the mayor's office. It lost a lot of its capacity because he was so against clangos and things. But actually, I think it's a more fundamental discussion, which is, for me, we will go into this general election, it's a good place to end. And the debate in the general election will largely be about three things. It will be about deficit reduction, it will be about the NHS, and it will be about immigration. And I think that will leave a lot of people in London and a certain generation pretty cold, because housing is as important a discussion point, but will not be discussed at national level. The reason why I'm so fired up and so excited is because my focus is London, and here at least you can have that debate, you can get into that discussion. Some of that will happen during the general election, because I'm going to make it happen a bit, but it's genuinely going to happen after the general election in the primary contest. If you like what I've said, go to my website, Lammy for Mayor, pay the £3 to register if you're not a member of the Labour Party or a member of a union, and vote for me. Thank you.